Managing Attorney of Indus Council, very experienced Silicon Valley attorney with 20 plus years of legal experience, representing businesses and individuals and emerging growth companies. And he's going to tell us more about how you can protect that hard-earned asset that you've built through real estate. So thank you so much, Snehal. Really appreciate your being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Snehal.
Thank you, Naga. Hello, everyone. Hopefully, now that you've all had food, some food for thought. How do you protect your assets? We've learned some tax strategies. We've learned about acquiring assets. I'm Snehal Patil. I'm managing partner of Indus Council. It's a Silicon Valley law firm. We're licensed. I'm personally licensed both in US and India. My colleague at the back, Rutuja, she's also licensed in both countries. So definitely have a wealth of experience. Like any presentation by a lawyer is not worth his salt if there's no disclaimer. So this is obviously just a legal general guidance. It's not specific legal advice, and under state bar regulations, it may be considered attorney advertising. Please obviously contact me if you have any specific legal requirements, right? Now, I think this is very important. I'll start with basics of estate planning. I'm shocked to say how many people are still not familiar with the concept of estate planning. So what does estate planning really mean? And this is something that every individual in this room is applicable to you. If you have it or you have it or you don't have it, right? I mean, if you have it, you want to amend it. If you don't have it, you want to create it. So what is estate planning? In simple words, estate planning means you're planning for any uncertainties caused by death or incapacity. Remember, these are two scenarios, death and incapacity. Incapacity is a medical condition, primarily where you can't make decisions for yourself or take care of yourself. Those are the situations when you want to be prepared to take care of yourself and your family. Think of estate planning as consisting of three verticals. Okay? Each vertical, there is a reason behind it and a goal in mind. Your first vertical, it relates to distributing all your wealth, what we call the estate or the assets, after your death to your beneficiaries. And beneficiaries could be your children, could be family members, relatives, friends, charitable organizations, whoever you want to give your wealth to after death. And the goal is you want to distribute that wealth in a private manner without involving the court process. That court process is called probate. So remember, goal number one is to avoid probate and distribute wealth privately. Second vertical, it relates to taking care of a minor child. Now 18 is the age of majority in California. If you have a minor child, you want to ensure that if you, the parent, something happens to you, either you pass away or you have medical condition and the child is under 18, you want to ensure that the child doesn't end up in foster care. Unfortunately, not many Indian families realize this, that even if you have an adult sibling or adult, say, grandparents or other family members to take care of it, that child could still end up in foster care. It's not like in India where you can just immediately take custody. So goal number two is to avoid foster care by setting up guardianship. Third vertical is about taking care of your own self, right? By that I mean, if there is a medical condition, I mean 2 years ago a lot of people realized that during COVID, but that doesn't mean that COVID is the only medical situation. You could be temporarily incapacitated, or unfortunately many times it does happen, you have a longer term medical issue. You will need somebody else to make your decisions, access to information. Again, unfortunately, many of us coming from India don't realize that in this country, even your spouse is not allowed to make decisions for you. Forget making decisions, they can't even access your information. So our goal number three is basically incapacity planning, right? Appointing those agents. Now what happens, since this is more focused on real estate, more on the asset, I will focus on the first vertical. Of course, feel free to reach out after the presentation if you want to discuss on the other two verticals. Now what happens if unfortunately the court takes over, and what is this probate? Many people are unclear about it. So let's understand what is probate. Probate is a court process. Simply means that the court will take over the distribution of your wealth after your death. Now when does the court get involved? In California, the court gets involved if, at the time of death, the deceased person's gross estate. What is gross estate? It's a sum total of the market value of all your assets. And remember, the gross value. So guess what? Doesn't matter how much mortgage you own or you have, how much taxes, liabilities, debt, etc. None of that counts. So simple example, if you have a $1 million house, which is not unusual in Bay Area at least, and you think that, okay, I owe 600K as a mortgage, my net or the equity is 400K, law doesn't count it based on the 400K, law looks at $1 million, right? Now, unfortunately, the sum total of all your assets at your death equals or exceeds the probate threshold, your estate will automatically end up in probate. Unfortunately, in California, the probate threshold is ridiculously low. The current probate threshold is a meager $184,500 total. Really? Are you kidding me? $184,500? Do you even need to own a house? How many Bay Area working professionals won't have bank accounts, stocks, jewelry, cards, etc.? Sum total, not per asset limit. So pretty much everybody in this room, their estate will end up in probate if they don't do estate planning. Now what happens if it ends up in probate? 4 major downsides. Number one, super expensive. Probate fees are not something your family can negotiate with a lawyer. These fees are prescribed in law and they calculated as a percentage again of your gross wealth, not the net wealth. Percentage starts at 4%, tapers down to 0.5% in slabs. So to give you a ballpark estimate, on the first $1 million of your gross estate, the probate cost itself will be about $46,000. Imagine paying that kind of a money. In my view, that is money unnecessarily spent by your estate to pay to the legal system to distribute your own assets to your own surviving family members only because it went through probate. Second downside, typically takes 2 years to go through. Now during that time you're gone, your assets are locked up in the court system and the surviving family members are relying on the probate judge to get access to them. Third downside, it's part of the court process. So everything that happens in court is public information. No longer remains a private matter, which means people could know who you were, what assets you own, who got what are their identities, etc. because it's all documented in the court proceedings. And the fourth downside is lack of control. If we prepare an estate plan for you, you will have full control over what happens, what doesn't happen. You can use your own subjective values to decide what to do. If it ends up in the court will distribute everything objectively based on default rules of California law, and in many ways what I call an Americanized way of looking at things, which may or may not gel with your personal values. Right? So for all these reasons, pretty much a no-brainer that you avoid probate. And how do you avoid probate? By creating a trust. So as Sanjeev ji said, the trust is something that all of us should create at a minimum. Now, so like I mentioned earlier, we also do Indian estate planning. There's subtle differences between US and India. In the US, as a legal system, think of every state as a separate nation for legal purposes. So California has its own laws, Nevada has its own laws, etc. Good thing is, we are licensed in California, which means we can do California estate planning for anybody and everybody. But you can have non-California assets. So if you buy properties, investment properties in other states, we can definitely create an estate plan for you. Sure. And then add whatever assets, but remember those assets will have to be within the US. If you have Indian assets, we can do a separate Indian estate planning. Okay? Now, what is asset protection? A lot of people talk about this, but I think in simple terms, it's simply nothing but a series of legal strategies or techniques that you will use to protect your assets from creditor claims. Whatever you have earned, whether it's your personal assets or a business that you have set up, right? The idea is you want to create a separation between what your business risk would be and what your personal assets are by coming up with a series of strategies. Who should consider asset protection? Just like estate planning is not meant only for the ultra-rich or the wealthy. Same way asset protection is meant for anybody who has assets. It can be either a high-risk profession like doctors, architects, or real estate developers. It could also be for real estate investors. So for many of you who either have rental or investment properties or are looking to go that route, definitely that is something for you to consider. And of course, high net worth individuals, people with a little bit more than just, what I call disposable income, right? Now, what are the strategies that we can use? There are a few that I have outlined, quite a few here, but we'll touch upon the main ones. The first is creating an entity. That could be a corp or a corporation. Now, S and C corp, these are simply tax elections, but at a high level, a corporation or a LLC or a LP stands for limited partnership or a family limited partnership. So these are more evolved structures where you want to pass on your wealth from one generation to another generation without, like let's say you gave your, put your wealth, but you don't want to give it to your child directly. What if the child ends up in a car accident and then loses the wealth to some lawsuit, right? So these are the kind of things. Then the asset protection trust. This is a very specialized estate planning tool that we can come up with to protect assets. Third is transferring property rights, title holding strategies, homestead exemptions, and then the last few are some of the things that others have touched upon is buying good policy, right? An umbrella insurance policy, malpractice insurance if you have a regulated profession like lawyers, doctors, etc. Life insurance and retirement, because usually those cannot be touched in a lawsuit. Now let's talk about legal entities, right? I think commonly people know that if it's a regulated profession like lawyers, doctors, architects, etc., they need to set up what are called professional corporations. These are nothing but regulated entities meant for licensed professionals. So if you're one of a licensed professional, then definitely that is the kind of entity you want to set up. You don't want to practice your profession in your personal capacity as a sole proprietor, because definitely if there is any claim, you will lose all your business income, right? Investment LLCs and rental LLCs, Sanjeev ji also touched upon this. Investment LLC, the primary focus is to basically, you are a passive or active investor, you're buying multiple portfolios and exiting after making a certain ROI. Rental LLCs, like Sanjeev ji also mentioned about rental income, right? And I guess many of us probably, when we decide to buy real estate, in addition to our primary, is more on the rental LLC side. Single entity versus multiple entities. Should you put your property in one entity? Whether all your asset portfolio, if you have more than one property, whether you put it in the same entity or you create an entity per property, whether you create corporate structure where you have a management entity separate or a real estate entity, title holding entity separate. Now these are some of the considerations I would say that you should look at from a both perspective, like legal as well as the financial and tax side, and then come up with a conclusion. Because if you just focus on the legal side, likely that it may not be tax or financially efficient, or if you just purely focus on the financial side, maybe it may not give you the kind of legal protections. So I would always encourage each one of you to talk to a good accountant and a good lawyer, try and come up with a complementary solution and then implement it, right? Location, like Sanjeev ji also said, yes, I mean, if it's a real estate title holding entity, that entity needs to be in the state where the property is located. But if it's an operating entity or management entity, it can be anywhere. And oftentimes these are some of the names that get thrown out because again, people are looking at privacy, people are looking at asset protection, etc. But always talk to an experienced counsel, because you would be surprised how much misinformation is there on the internet about Wyoming or Nevada, it doesn't always work for everybody. Right? Now, benefits of a rental LLC. I think this is very, very important for everybody to understand that yes, at a high level, the LLC gives you a liability protection. In short, take an example where you own a rental property in your personal capacity, which means the landlord is you in your personal capacity. If there is a lawsuit, that lawsuit will go after all the assets that is owned by that person, right? And if your umbrella insurance policy is not sufficient to cover that, unfortunately your primary residence, your jewelry, your bank account, stocks, everything is on the line. When you create an LLC, it creates a separation between your business risk and personal assets. Because now the landlord is the legal entity, the LLC, and if it's properly created and maintained, it can act as a separation between those two. Worst case scenario, you can always declare business bankruptcy, let that property go, but all your other assets could be secure, right? Then another thing, like I mentioned, if your umbrella insurance policy is not sufficient to cover. Now remember, every insurance has its own riders, has its own limits. So please don't be under the impression that just because you bought an umbrella insurance policy, it doesn't matter whether it's 4x, 5x, etc. It will cover you in each and every scenario. Talk to your insurance broker, take a good look at all these policies. Remember, the insurance companies are in it not necessarily to protect you, but their first goal is to protect themselves financially, right? So make sure you read your policies, understand that. Creditor protection, I think this third item is not known by most people. What is that? Take a simple example. You hired a developer or somebody to do some construction work on your property. You entered into a contract, the person did the work. You think the work was shoddy. That person says the work is perfect. There's a dispute, he sues you. You're not paying me my $50,000 that you agreed to pay me for doing the work. Unfortunately for you, you lose a lawsuit. Now what happens? For that $50,000 claim, if you hold the property in your personal capacity, they can actually force a sale of the property. Property may be worth $500,000, $1 million. Their claim is hardly, compared to that of $50,000 claim, but they can force a sale of the property. As opposed to that, if the property is held by an LLC, at best they can put what is a lien on the property, which means whatever income is generated out of that property, which primarily would be rental income, that can be paid towards paying off that $50,000 debt. But at least it will secure your property. So I think it's very important to understand that could be a big reason why you want to set up a rental LLC. And then of course there are tax benefits like anything. If set up correctly, it could give you some anonymity. And it also greatly helps in intergenerational transfer of wealth. Because once you put the property in the LLC, the title can be changed at one time, and at the back end, the membership or the ownership of the LLC, you can keep shifting it from yourself to your children, to their spouses, to others, and it helps without having to do additional title recordings. Pitfalls, I think some of it were touched upon, but I think the first two are very important. Always work with a experienced counsel to do this, because if the title is not correctly recorded, it could trigger property tax reassessments. In your mind, you're thinking, oh, I'm putting my own property in my own LLC. I own it 100%. Why does it trigger? No, that's not how the law looks at it. Unfortunately, it is considered a sale unless it is exempt. So make sure that whoever does your title recording know how to do it. Due on sale clause, this is again a similar concept, that if you have a mortgage on the property, make sure that your lender is on board with it. Otherwise, it could trigger repayment of your mortgage, right? So make sure that and unfortunately, we are not in a market right now where you can refinance the property and recoup that, go to a better lender or at least an equivalent lender. Most of us might have refinanced it a couple of years ago. You might have a very low loan. Other than that, There are obviously LLC has its own setup, and like in California, franchise tax is $800. I will briefly touch upon this because this is a very complicated area of estate planning, difficult to put together in a few minutes. But these are some estate planning tools, advanced strategies that you can come up with. Remember, whenever you start with a basic estate planning, the one that I touched upon first, the trust that we all should create at a minimum is a revocable living trust. Revocable means it's malleable. You can change it any number of times during your lifetime. Any tax planning strategies, any asset protection typically will require creation of irrevocable trust. Irrevocable is the exact opposite. You can't freely change it. My simple analogy is you can either put money directly into stock market or you can do it through a 401k and IRA. Why do you do it through a 401k IRA? Obvious tax benefits. But then guess what? The IRS says, hey, if we are giving you some benefits on the tax side, we also want you to be bound by a finite structure. You can't freely make changes. So think of an irrevocable trust as a similar construct where you will get tax benefits, you will get asset protection benefits, but you lose the flexibility to make changes freely. So those are the kind of things that you have to think carefully. So these are different kind of trusts that you can set up depending on your objective. This slide I'll definitely spend some more time because I can't tell you how many times I've seen errors in title recording. Okay? Now remember, when you own your primary residence, if you're a single person, well, not much to worry about because it's only your name on the title. It doesn't matter how you hold it. But if you're a married couple or business partners could be friends who coming together, could be siblings, could be other family members, etc. It's important to look at the title because the lenders will never advise you how to hold it. There are two concepts, joint tenancy and community property with right of survivorship. Joint tenancy and community property with right of survivorship both mean that if there are two people on the title, okay, whoever survives will end up getting the remainder percent. So let's say the husband and wife own 50-50, on the death of one of them, the surviving spouse will get 100%. Typically that is how most married couples would want the title to evolve. But guess what? Exact opposite is if you own title as friends, as family members. That's not what you want. How many of you have actually looked at this verbiage? It's so common. I have seen that you will see that two people put together money, they own title, and the title is recorded as joint tenants, which means if one friend passes away, that friend's 50% or whatever percent share will end up going to that other friend, not to the deceased friend's family members or others, right? And this is the law. You can't change it. So make sure that you read your title correctly and go to an experienced professional who can record it for you. Title holding of LLC, we already touched upon this, is that it needs to be in the county where it is recorded. But you could also come up with structures where you can have a separate holding company and then have separate title holding companies underneath. So there are more complicated structures that you can come up with. Homestead exemption. This is another thing that you can come up with if you anticipate any lawsuits, etc. What is the homestead exemption? It's simply a construct where, let's say, the law is allowing you to protect a certain amount of equity in your primary home. Okay? Remember, the homestead exemption only applies to your primary residence. It will not apply to a second home. It will not apply to a rental property. Minimum equity that you can protect is 300,000 up to 600,000 adjusted for inflation. There is a certain formula by which so if you see the current limits, I have set 2023 limits. So you can protect up to 339K to say about So it's around 678K in equity if you have a primary residence in a high value market, which means if ever there is a lawsuit against you for any personal claims, let's say you hit somebody in a car accident, unfortunately they passed away or had a serious injury, they sue you, your auto insurance policy doesn't cover it enough, and now you are on the hook. They want to force a sale of your primary residence. They are successful in doing that. They can still retain, you can still retain the value of that home up to 678 if it's in a high value market, which means the claimant can only get the excess amount. If let's say if they sold it for 1 million, for 678K you can use it. They cannot touch that. Okay? How we help? So like I mentioned earlier, I'm an experienced counsel, 25 plus years in US and India. We are a boutique law firm. We are based here in Fremont. Good thing is on the estate planning side, we do accept a lot of legal insurance plans. I've named a few, but pretty much a lot of the insurance companies, at least in the Bay Area, if you have legal insurance, feel free to reach out. We can utilize that. If you don't have one, I know we are a little late on the open enrollment because it's already, for most of us, maybe over already. But if you do have an option to sign up for legal insurance during open enrollment, try to do that. It saves you a lot of time and money. Fees, payment options. If you have legal insurance, most of it will be covered by insurance. You will have to pay a copay or a deductible, but it's still a smaller amount. We do accept fixed fees, so at least the exposure is capped. It's not like you're paying at $600,000, $800,000 an hour. You will know upfront how much it is. We could use deferred fees with a 0% interest. We have tie-ups with some lenders who can potentially give you like Affirm, for instance, right? You go online shopping, you pay through Affirm and you pay them in installments. That's an option too. And finally, IndusStore. So IndusStore is a legal e-commerce site that we powered. It's basically all the documents that there can be generated typically the way you would think of a legal e-commerce, but the big difference is this is created by us, a Silicon Valley law firm, which means you're not going through a software aggregator or software generator. These are templates that I've personally curated. I would spend a few seconds to look at this, a few minutes to look at this. Don't be this person, right? You want to leave a right legacy, earn the money, make assets, but make sure that you create legal structures that will ensure the wealth is passed on to your next generation. These are my contact details. I will be here for the rest of the day. My colleagues are also there. If you have any questions, I can take that now, or we can always talk after the presentation as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was very nice learning about estate planning, something that we as a community tend to sweep under the carpet, but not anymore because it's incredibly essential, right? Having the estate, the trust, and to guard your wealth and your assets.
Thank you so much, Snehal. Listeners, like if you have any questions on this estate planning, Snehal will be here. He has a booth also.
Yes. Please circulate around. I know it's like lunchtime siesta, or I mean inertia rather, not siesta. But just go around, meet.